Yeah, yes.
Sir, you can start, sir.
Okay, thank you. So is it changing? So you will be changing, correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You can guide me whenever I'm supposed to change the
Yes, yes.
slides. I will do it.
Okay, no, they are sharing. Okay, so thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about this issue very clearly. And this is an important dimensions we need to talk. And let me start saying that the mental health implication in disaster and climate change is something which is going on for long, but gradually we are understanding the climatic crisis. And we can't just tell the disasters are separate from the climate change. They're so closely related. So that's why we need to bring them much closer to understand the context of disaster and the climate change as a whole. I hope I am audible. Can you go to the next? Yeah. So now, once we look at the disaster, it is not just a situation, but gradually we are moving towards the complex emergencies more. So particularly if I tell you, see, the once WHO had told very clearly that it is beyond the capacity of the people to control the disaster. But now as we are moving towards the complex emergency, then we see that there is a whole lot of issues which are related to political, economic, environmental, and the demographic instability because of huge human movement, which is also coming up. So here there are changes in the livelihood pattern, and there is definite threat on the people's life because of civil disturbance which is happening. And that gets complicated, overloaded with the conditions of disaster like drought, or the earthquake or severe cold wave, many of these extreme climate event. So as such, there is a huge problem with the civil disturbance adding to the natural disasters is becoming an issue. Can you go to the next? Further, if we start talking, we really understand there is nothing called natural disaster at this moment. Gradually, we are seeing and we understood over the time, and it is being said in theory that there is no disaster without human hand. So disaster happens because of human engagement. So that is one more aspect, like the glacier melting in the poles or how it is going to impact is also making a concern. That's how the climate change becomes so important topic for us. When you look at the Diwali situation in Delhi, or when we are seeing the underground burning happening in the Koliari region of Bihar, Jharkhand, we understand that there is a threat on the people's life in their living conditions, and these conditions goes on in different contexts. As a whole, this condition we started understanding from the time of the industrial revolutions and conditions which have made people to feel unsafe in their own conditions in their home. Those are very important mental health conditions. So there is a huge impact on the ecology where people are living. It is not just a short-term impact, it is a long-term impact. And extreme weather events are increasing gradually. And we know day by day there will be more number of disasters and there will be more severe in nature. This also being understood. And every development we do, we increase our risk of disaster. This is very clear, like from our travel, from the bullock cart to the aircraft, has increased the chance of death in case of accident from 0 to 100 when we are traveling. So that way we see that the development is equally proportionately connected with the kind of problem which we will face and has a mental health impact on it. So this increased vulnerability to the disaster, what I understand and what the theory says as a whole, four important reasons comes up. First of all, if we see the climate change, which is being said one of the top threat to the global health in 21st century. Second, we are looking at all the increasing amount of human aggressions. See, all these kinds of human aggression is only leading to the war, displacement, and the conflict, which is gradually increasing. And definitely the human consumptions, the consumerism has gone in an extent which is causing a disasters as a whole and the climate change in turn. So this human consumption is another reason. And the last one, definitely human apathy, because we don't really bother till the time it doesn't happen to my home. So this is the conditions that the melting of ice in pole is really going to impact or not. The situation goes like this. So working for the survivor, working for the people before they become survivor, working for the people is not just a matter of choice. It is a matter of most important need. If we have to protect the humanity, if we have to save, because these impacts are going to cripple more and more, that we understand. And as a whole, if we see this heat, rising temperature, sea level, episodic drought, a heavy rain, this time Rajasthan is raining so much. And if I had been to Mongolia, where there is a disaster called Doos, which is a very severe cold, which lead to the death of the animals and subsequent problem. So if we see this kind of climatic heat waves and conditions are increasing gradually, and we are facing more problem with those situations. Go to the next, please. So what we see that as a whole, this whole condition, how it is impacting us, how it is impacting human mind, because it is very close connect the social, the neuropsychology and social psychology together. When we look at this, the social neurology, we see that the brain is changing. However, amygdala is reacting, is also connected to it. So what is happening in the society is equally impacting our mind, our brain, and the symptoms are coming up. If we look at this Fully-Love's theory, we see the three important things what she had mentioned in place psychology, which is very relevant. That once these conditions happen, a disaster happens or similar climate conditions which leads to the displacement or feeling of threat of the position where they are living, the place which was very known to them, very familiar to them, suddenly become unfamiliar. So there is a loss of attachment, loss of familiarity, loss of identity. So the whole conditions which was very known to them suddenly become unfamiliar. And that condition creates a lot of crisis with the situation where they identify themselves with a place. So the people who are living on the hill terrain, suddenly everything is gone. Now they have to come back to the plain. So all these conditions is impacting not just their home, their livelihood, their adjustment to the situation. So these conditions keep on increasing. So everybody wants to live in a good enough place where they identify with these three factors because of displacement, because of the forced situation, because of the climate which is now imposing threat on their well-being of living at home, is creating a problem where they lose their sense of being happy to that place. So sense of place get lost as a first important understanding to it. Go to the next, please. So we see the rupture happens. The rupture happens quite a lot. And the social existence of a person which is determined by the psychological state of an individual is highly being impacted. So psychological states depend on that. The environment determines the satisfaction of being in a place. And that place becomes very threatening when there is a disaster or climate change happen. And ultimately, there is a loss of sense of place. So people suffer in a long term as well. Please go to the next. So what we see that these conditions are impacting are connected to all these factors. It is not just the single factor which leads. Like when you look at the tribal people who are dependent in the Himalayan region with their sheep, the pastoral community has to start moving out differently for the hunt, and their whole pattern has been changed when you looked at the pastoral community and their mental health. The same way when we see the school children in Delhi, how they are impacting, or the noise level, how it is impacting, these kind of understanding tells us that the mental health situation is getting worsened, and we need to be prepared to understand those mental health contexts. So there is definitely physical impact like injury, sickness is increasing. If you are in Delhi and you understand, I was there for long, if you have a 60 plus or 65 plus person at home, you need an oxygen cylinder during the Diwali. That is the condition. So there is often amputation, paraplegia, which I have seen a lot in Gujarat earthquake situation. Disability is being set in, and the mental health disability is one of the most important thing. And there is a loss of tranquility, increasing burden. The whole mental health burden is increasing because of the climate change impact. And there is a social conditions. That is, the argument is increasing, loss of belongingness, loss of neighborhood conditions. These conditions is disrupting the food change, displacement. These are all connected conditions. And actually, it is increasing the level of poverty. in the community as an economic impact, that is losing the livelihood, loss of the saving property. All these things are actually creating a traumatic, stressful life event when there is a high amount of climate change with the threat of disaster or with the event of disaster, both body and mind. So it's become a life-threatening conditions. It's become an alarming state for them, where brain also start reacting to the situation and people start feeling change in the body and mind. Can you go to the next? What we see as a whole, these are the different traumatic reaction. Please click 4 times. Yeah, we see this is a different reaction which all of us know stuff. Okay, so we see there is a behavioral, physical, emotional, and the relational change which starts happening as a direct impact of these whole conditions of disaster or in the climate change. People are unable to function, so the functionality level goes down in different contexts. Vague pain, emotional problems starts happening, mood swing very common, different kind of vague symptoms like headache, body pain happen, disagreement, all these conditions happen. Please go to the next. What we see as a whole is that this climate change, what in the immediate phase we say reaction, in the long term that's become a disorder. So as a whole, we see the climate change and mental health issues are quite a lot. From the research we get that the post-traumatic stress disorder comes and develops. So how it is changing, the cultural role is also there. There are a lot of things that in Indian condition, the PTSD is not so high, but gradually we see that this is also becoming a major problem. Mood disorder, depression, the eco-related depression is also going to be very high. Anxiety disorder, psychotic disorder, cognitive disorder, particularly dementia among the elderly population is happening, substance use disorder increasing rates of suicidal ideation, what we have seen in Bidar region, talked a lot but still worked less, and the hospital admission. So as a whole, the disability is increasing, functionality is reducing, and the stress in long term setting in as a disorder in the body and mind. So that is the condition which is happening because of the climate change. Typically, these two conditions, like the sloesthesia, which is opposite to nostalgia, is the distress that is produced by the environmental condition gradually coming up. And in future, it will come up in our diagnostic criteria also. So people exposed to the environmental change experiences negative effect that is exacerbated by a sense of powerlessness or lack of control over the unfolding change. People are unable to understand, how should I live? I cannot, so I might have to move out from this place. When there is a very industry comes up and there is a lot of smell, chemical smell, these are happening. Lot of sound happening. In Jharia region of Jharkhand, underground burning is going on. So all these conditions are happening, which is impacting our life. So distress experienced as a direct result of the threat to the home environment. And with that, climate anxiety is increasing as a heightened emotional, mental, somatic stress in response to the dangerous change in the climate system. So panic attack, loss of appetite, irritability, all these. And if we see that the tetra connect, that the because of mental and the psychological conditions also, and the earth-related situation started impacting our body and mind, and that has an impact as a whole. Please go to the next. So as a whole, at the end, please keep clicking. I would like to talk that this is the conditions what we need to see, that the disaster and climate change definitely leading to distress and the mental health issues. So we need to work on all the dimensions to facilitate psychosocial support and mental health services. In psychosocial support at the individual level, giving knowledge starting from the school level, starting from the basic level, individual knowledge gain is very important. At family, at group level, how they should, what should be the sound of the TV is also important to maintain at the family level for the home environment. So these are the conditions which we need to see how best we prepare them, how the community as a whole respond, what kind of planning strategy they could work on. So all these become part of the psychosocial intervention over this whole paradigm of climate change and mental health. And we also need to work at the mental health services from the community to PHC to the higher level tertiary care, where very less might go if we are well organized and functional well to work at the bottom level. So what we see at the community care support we need PHC, CHC, hospital preparedness, all this kind of emergency preparedness we need. We have to ensure that it works. People are being trained at different stakeholders to understand, and the tertiary level specialized care to see those changes could be tackled well in time. Put one more, enter one more. There is something in the bottom will come up. Yeah. So what we see is that the increasing strength for effective adaptation is needed. Looking at the climate change, mental health impact on different kind of population and the vulnerable population as a whole. And we need to ensure that we could work for reducing those vulnerability and building climate resilient health system become an ultimate answer for us to bridge this problem and to ensure that we successfully succeed towards a sustainable development goals with a healthy human life, which will lead to a psychosocial well-being. So go to the last. So thank you and for giving me the time, and thank you. So we can go over for the question clarification as the time comes up. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your informative and insightful presentation. You shed light on the significant mental health impacts of disasters and climate change, emphasizing how these crises disrupt ecological and psychosocial balance, increasing vulnerability and contributing to various mental health disorders. The concept of solastalgia, distress caused by environmental changes, was particularly striking, highlighting the psychosocial burden of losing one's sense of place. Additionally, you discussed the crucial role of integrated psychosocial support programs in building community resilience and reducing vulnerabilities. Once again, I thank you for your wonderful presentation, sir. With great delight, I now invite the next speaker for today's MSD, Dr. Jayakumar C., Additional Professor, Department of Psychosocial Support in Disaster Management, NIMHANS. Dr. Jayakumar C. has extensive experience in providing psychosocial support and mental health services in disaster situations. He has significantly contributed to the National Disaster Management Authority of India. Dr. Jayakumar has been instrumental in developing, monitoring, and implementing national policies and plans. Dr. Jayakumar will be speaking on the topic Climate Change and Wayanad Landslide, Mental Health Implications. Over to you, sir.
Dr. Subhi, thank you very much for that introduction, and good evening to each one of you there, and my co-panelists, Dr. Subhashish and Dr. Naveen, my co-speakers, and esteemed panelists, and all those who are actually joined from elsewhere. Presently, I'm not in NIMHANS. I'm on travel work. Presently, I'm talking this from AIIMS Mangalagiri, Andhra Pradesh. So my topic here is that it is about climate crisis in the context of Wayanad, the disaster which we are actually seeing, handling at present. I had the opportunity to be there for more than 6 days, looking into various aspects in Wayanad. So, like Dr. Subhashish was talking about various sort of hazard risk vulnerabilities. Of course, we all are aware that how this climate change puts this interconnectivity of vulnerability, exposure, and weather climate events. So we know it, or we like it or not. It is just not about climate change. We have to accept that it is actually the extreme weather pattern which we are experiencing on a day-to-day basis across the spectrum of globe, or across the spectrum of our life. So with this, actually, that I mean, I will not go into the repetition. Next. So you can keep pressing this. So these are all some of the vulnerabilities which we are actually looking into it, how these things actually intensifies actually and culminates in a sort of a downward in a pattern of actually affecting people, especially people who are affecting from low socioeconomic status, poor, vulnerable, who are at risk. Next. So we all know actually that I already mentioned about the interplay of these things. Next. So in the last many years, this is what happening. The interplay between these three aspects, we need to actually importantly understand actually that how these things are actually culminating into an impact, a multifold impact on the mental health, on the physical health, and the community's health. So if you look at it, actually, that what starts as an helplessness and hopelessness, and gradually, actually, it actually graduates into next level of actually complications in terms of actually handling that situation or handling that loss or actually bringing back, insulating themselves from the degraded sort of a social support system. And finally, actually, that where actually it leads, the distress actually leads to, and the dysfunction leads to disorder and maybe actually on a disability front, on a long term, this one. And the same actually on the physical front, actually, that how the impaired aspects of the physical things changes into actually more complicated sort of anomalies in our biological aspects, and how this actually that disintegrated and degraded community structures, community resources actually can be determined in actually our physical as well as mental health sort of a support. And this is exactly actually what I mean. Why not? I'm coming back to it actually in my latest slides. Next. So what we are actually looking at actually that in climate change, both direct and indirect, I think the slides got changed. You have to go back at. Should we? You have to go. Yes, exactly. Please stop here. So climate hazards today pose a very grave danger, and it has actually a very major public health footprint that we are looking at from an well-being to an ill-being paradigm, where things are actually go towards downward this one drift. And you look at actually the direct as well as indirect and vicarious sort of things which is going on, and this is exactly that very floridly actually we could see among the Wayanad survivors, people who are actually missing their families, people lost their livelihood, people actually lost their this one. See, one distinct impact I would actually quote here from other disasters to Wayanad disaster is that there are 3, 4 things very distinct happened in Wayanad disaster. Other disasters, your life will be intact. You are actually, at least the property will be half intact, half may have gone. Or your community sources will be intact. Everything, actually, half of the things will be intact. So there is actually some sort of a consolation and insulation actually is there for you to actually wade through this difficulty, the trauma and distress. But in Wayanad, that first and foremost, it is actually ecologically it is destructed. There is environmentally it is gone, and there are no houses, there are no structures, there are no people, there are no schools, there are nothing is actually there. I mean, there's no place is there. So there is actually an existential crisis for them. There is an identity crisis for them. Who to actually be related? There is no Mundakai, there is no Chural Malar, there is no Kunjari Mattam. All these things are vanished. And it is like a carpet bombing. So somebody actually who was born there, who grew up there, who established their connectivity, who actually formed their own community, insulation, everything. So everything is gone. So this is actually the highest form of actually distress. And this is actually going to be the recipe for major mental health issues, not only at the present, actually also in the later stage. So that is where actually that as mental health professionals, we need to look at not this one as a one-off sort of an event, but this is going to be a timeline sort of an event. We have to actually look at from a longer perspective, immediate, mid-term, and long-term mental health outcome of these communities, individuals, families to come in coming days. Next. So, broad implications. What are actually the broad implications? See, the moment I landed there, first thing was actually there. Sir, where do we go now here? We can't even identify ourselves that we are from Mundakai village. We are from Chural Bala. There's nothing exists. This is where my father and mother were there. This is where I grow. Today, it is not there. Nothing is there. I can't actually delete all these things in overnight. So I don't know what to do. I'm confused. What to live, whether to live or not. So these sort of things. So diminished sense of self, loss of place and place bonds, loss of occupation. All those things are actually very rampant in the initial days. And this is actually going to be actually create more conflict about the social identity, conflict about the sense of purpose, conflict, because they are uprooted actually from what is that actually they have been for all these years. Next. Next. So you know actually that I'm not going into the details, although I wanted to show you some video about that. So this which I told you actually completely distracted. And next. Next. You can skip this. Yeah. So exactly this is what actually you can actually see very floridly. Previous slide, please. Yeah. So immediate, of course, when we were there, shock and loss, all those immediate sort of reactions were there. So people were perplexed, people were confused, people were helpless, hopeless, and people were also actually feeling good because there were in most of the relief camps I have seen more resources, more number of people, more help, more actually people to talk and hear. So they were insulated more than adequate in the initial days. But real actually the challenge comes after the weaning off period, that is the heroic phase. Now 20 days or 30 days, we are actually tracking this. Now the relief camps are getting closed and they will be sent back to either temporary relief shelters nearby other places or actually to their relatives' homes or somewhere else. So that is where actually that the real issue actually of mental health issues going to steps in, it is going to escalate, so it's going to be a burden, it's going to create a lot of discomfort actually in their living. So that disaster leads to distress, the distress leads to the dysfunction. All these days, these people were in the camp, fed adequately, more than sufficient, even more than sufficient, everything. But suddenly the reality touch will start setting in. There actually there the reactions of frustration, anger, sense of purpose, and all those things are actually going to set in. And also, the thing is that there is not closure for many of the people. Only 100 or 120 bodies are identified. I think 150 bodies. The rest of them are still actually weak flesh or something, or hand or some body parts are only there. Although there has been a lot of effort is going on actually to identify match through DNA matching. But the thing is that there are a number of families who will not be having any closure in the coming years. I mean, the months and years, and it's going to be very traumatizing for many of these people, other than losing their family members. So, like this, you will find actually a different sort of a population in there. Children who have lost their families, men who have lost their entire families, women, and different groups. And it is just not about actually people who have lost direct losses, direct impact. See, for example, those teachers of the Choralmala school and that bus driver and conductor is not able to come back because every day they used to go to that place and they used to interact with the kids and they used to transport the kids, and all of them are buried under now. So it is just not about the primary actually survivors or primary people who are there at the ground zero. It is also actually the secondary survivors. So here actually three groups are there: the primary survivors, the secondary survivors are like this, and the first responders also, because this is not the very one of the most toughest rescue for any first responders, because the kind of destruction actually that we brought on the people and the place. So it is actually going to be very difficult on the coming days, not only for the rebuilding purpose, rehabilitating purpose, but it is just not about rehabilitating, rebuilding the environment and ecology of the destructed place, but also the minds of these people. How are we actually going to bring them back, handling all those transient actually sort of issues which is they are going to face from a different point of time for a different population. Next. So we are all quite aware actually that this all things actually happens. I'll tell you from my experience there what happened when I was there in the first week. Suddenly there were two suicides reported. Two boys committed suicide. What happened was they were actually searching. This is what we heard from media, from the collectorate and others, and we were there also in the field. They were searching for their last two of their very close relationship people, and they could not find the body. They first joined actually the first responders, and then out of despair and this one, finally actually the two of them committed suicide there. So these sort of risks also actually keep increasing. It is just not about the distress. It is just not about actually that what is that they lost. The subsequent lifestyle struggles, the inability to adapt to actually the changed situation, and this is going to be actually more challenging in these sort of circumstances. That's what actually that we are actually looking at this, and also how these children are going to be adapting, adjusting to the changed situation, because rehabilitation will not happen there. And there is actually expert committee already told there these one or two places are Kunjarimattam and some of the places in Mundakai and Chorimala are not fit for inhabitation. So where are they going to be replaced and displaced and replaced somewhere far away places? And there actually that the lifestyle struggles start. So it is not going to be easy for these people in the coming days. And that is actually a lot of signs are actually already actually coming out. So as a mental health professionals, people who are on the ground, people who belongs to that place, have to actually devise and design the interventions actually to cater to these sort of oncoming, fleeting sort of an interventions. Because one thing in climate change, we can see actually that we always actually go and intervene with the diagnosable sort of issues. Rather than before that, there are actually mid and fleeting sort of an issue, which are mostly actually not touched or identified, or there are no indicators. Of course, there are actually a number of efforts are going on around the world to actually how we can actually include this fleeting sort of an issue, so that actually that we can actually work on the resilience aspect of these people, not only treating them on a diagram, I mean, until they reach the diagnosable form, but before itself, how we can actually guard them actually going into that sort of a stage and make them actually more resilient. I mean, provide them with a healthy coping aspect. So these are all some of the challenges actually that not only in Wayanad, in any climate change actually aspects actually that as a mental health professionals we need to look into it. Next. So these are actually some of the things which we could actually see in the previous slides. Previous slide. Previous slide. Previous slide. Previous slide. Can I go back? Yeah. Yeah. This is next. So see, there are a number of population, marginalized population, subpopulation. See, one of the population I come across here is that the migrant population who are actually basically who were working in either resorts or actually from in the tea gardens, who are from MP, Assam, Bihar, and Orissa, Bengal. So this migrant population had a different sort of a challenges actually other than the local population. At least local population had their roots and everything. So there were actually a number of other sort of a psychosocial support. The support system were actually
Sir, you're not audible. Jaykumar, sir.
I think we've lost him. We've lost
Yes, sir.
contact. Not audible.
Yeah, could one of you please call him and find out?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We are calling him.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. There are some technical issues. We are trying to get in touch with Dr. Jaikumar. Please wait for a while. Thank you.
I'm connecting from my mobile. I'm sorry. My connection went off in the device. Hello.
Yes, sir. We can hear you. Jaikumar, sir, please proceed. Now we can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, yes.
See, I apologize.
Yes,
The larger device connection went off. So I'm connecting through my mobile. You can actually show the PowerPoint, no issues. I'll talk without PowerPoint. So there are a lot of issues actually which we could notice among the migrant communities. First and foremost, they were actually very, very helpless, out of place, and they had that feeling of actually being left alone. Hello.
Yes,
You
sir.
can
You're
hear
audible,
me,
sir.
no?
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Yes.
you are audible, sir. Please go on.
Yeah, thank you. So they were feeling of being left out, feeling of being discriminated. This is actually a feeling, but there are actually, I could see actually that government of Kerala was doing, the government side and the non-government, everybody is doing more than they can actually do it. But since this sort of a traumatic experience forces them actually towards this sort of actually feeling also, and so we need to actually look into various marginalized groups also actually here. So it is just not about the survivors. Among the survivors, I came across some 30 to 40 subgroups inside. So it is actually very, very challenging for mental health professionals to each identify each one of them and cater to their each one's distinct requirements. Mental health requirements is actually one of the need of the hour. Actually, I could say actually that, and also actually that at the field level, the first responders, the ambulance crew, and the rescuers, and these people had such a horrific timing, because morning to evening they keep digging, and nothing they find, and after 4 days they find one finger and or one hand actually that. So it is quite traumatic for them also actually that when your mission is not accomplished, when your mission is keep going on without an end or uncertainty, but still actually that you have to fulfill actually for the communities, the survivors, and say. So it actually takes a lot of emotional toll on the first responders and the caregivers also. And I'm sure actually that the doctors who have done the autopsy in the Nilambur Medical College, where actually more number of autopsies were done, had a horrific time. I mean, they all actually needs to be actually intervened on a psychosocial care front. So it is just not about that. And administrators also were clueless initially actually that, because the enormity of the disaster, they quickly regained actually that. And it took actually a toll on everyone were there. It is just not that. The whole people who congregated there were some form were affected by this enormity of this one. So factors influencing psychological, this one is, it is just not the mental health outcome like PTSD, depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation and aggression, addiction, and all those things. But also actually that how we are their response responding to these sort of things, and how we can actually design and develop and implement response interventions more actually based on the survivors' needs, rather than actually bringing in actually something actually from outside. So we need to actually look at actually that what is that local capacities, traditional wisdom, traditional knowledge in handling this adjustment and adaptive issues in the coming days. So I think actually that I will stop it, and if any questions are there, you can actually also ask me.
So what would be actually that on a research front, actually, and mental health professionals should be actually doing here is that we all know actually that what is our limitation is that we don't have a comprehensive data collection. I think there should be a comprehensive data collection, and from baseline to longitudinal. The study should actually look at intermediate and medium and long-term implications, intervention effectiveness, and we need to actually bring out actually sort of an indicators actually that which actually not only look at the end point but in between and beginning as well. And needs to be actually more capacity building training on a multi-sectoral focused capacity building activities. And also, we need to put a robust referral and follow-up system involving the local mental health professionals. And Kerala has actually an adequate mental health professionals are there, and they are working on it. They are actually putting the system. So, and this needs to be culturally sensitive also. That is what important. And I think actually that this Wayanad actually would actually an eye-opener and would give actually more impetus actually on the coming days on how to handle such a scale of a disaster like a landslide actually for the whole nation. It is just not actually about the for the Kerala. I mean, it can be actually a study for all of us actually there, and a chance to actually serve those people also there. So with this, actually, I thank the organizers for this opportunity, and I look forward for any questions or comments, feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for such an incredible and impactful presentation. You explored the profound effects of climate change and disasters on mental health, highlighting how increasing frequency and severity of extreme weather events are contributing to a range of mental health challenges. Your use of specific examples such as the Wayanad landslide effectively illustrated the mental health repercussions for different groups, including children, the elderly, and the first responders. The presentation underscored the necessity of both immediate and long-term psychosocial support and stressed the importance of integrating mental health considerations into climate action policies. Thank you once more, sir, for your exceptional presentation.
Thank you, Shubhi. So I should be actually going and continuing my other training, and apologize to you and others for this. And sure, actually, that in future we will connect. Thank you very much.
Sure, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. I don't see any questions in the chat box, so I think we can move to our next segment. But again, I would like to reiterate the message that Dr. Naveen C. Kumar, Professor of Psychiatry, NIMHANS, Officer in Charge, Center of Excellence on Mental Health, National Program of Climate Change and Human Health, Government of India, was supposed to be one of the speakers in the first session of today's mental health dialogue. But due to an unfortunate or due to some personal reasons, he's unable to join today's session. So we regret that. With this, we reach the end of the first segment. Once again, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to all our speakers, Dr. Subhashish Bhadra and Dr. Jay Kumar C, for their outstanding presentations in today's mental health dialogue. Now it's time to move to our next segment, the panel discussion. I request Dr. Reshma Harikumar to take over the session. Thank you, one and all. Over to you, Reshma.
Thank you, Dr. Raisa. Good day, everyone. We are about to begin our much anticipated panel discussion. It's an honor to have 4 esteemed panelists with us today. Our first panelist, Mr. Manish Mohandas, Program Specialist at UNDP India, leading the Resilience and Disaster Management portfolio. He has extensive experience in disaster management, humanitarian aid, capacity building, and climate change adaptation. Next on our panel, Dr. Vivek Benegal, Principal Investigator of National Mental Health Survey 2 and Professor and Head of Psychiatry at NIMHANS. He previously led the Department of Psychosocial Support in Disaster Management at NIMHANS and contributed to the National Guidelines on Climate Change and Mental Health, as well as the National Disaster Management Authority Guidelines on Mental Health and Psychosocial Support Services to Disasters. Our next panelist, Dr. Sainik Day, Professor at the Center for Atmospheric Science, IIT Delhi, and an expert member of WHO's Air Quality and Health Program. His research contributes to the field of air quality, climate change, health nexus, and remote sensing of the Earth's climate system. Finally, we are privileged to have Dr. H. Paramesh, Professor at the Indian Institute of Science, Bengaluru, and co-chair of the International Pediatric Association on Environmental Health and Climate Change. He has served as a facilitator, panelist to the health projects of WHO, UNICEF, UNDP, and the Government of India. To guide us through the insightful discussion, we have our dedicated moderators, Dr. Prijad R., Associate Professor of Epidemiology at NIMHANS, and Dr. Leda K., Associate Professor of Mental Health Education at NIMHANS. Without further delay, I hand over the session to our esteemed moderators. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, at the outset, I would like to welcome all the esteemed panelists for today's panel discussion on disaster, climate crisis and mind and understanding the impact of the changing world. So I would like to pose the first question to Mr. Manish Mohan Das. Sir, climate change intensifies extreme weather events, which can significantly impact the mental health and also leading to increased stress and anxiety in the communities. And given these mental health challenges and which are exacerbated by the climate-induced disasters, how can resilience programs effectively incorporate the psychological support, and what role do international and local collaborations play in this?
Yeah, thank you, Latika ji, for this question. And at the outset, I'd like to thank Dr. Jayakumar and his team for providing UNDP with this opportunity to come here and speak and share some of these ideas. After the initial two presentations, I think there is no need for me to speak about the need and the importance of psychosocial care. It was covered in great length and great depth. I would just like to share some points from UNDP's perspectives in terms of some of the practical examples that we've been facing and some of the ideas that we've been sharing with the governments in our line of work. Now, for instance, it's a given that the frequency of disasters have been increasing. There is no doubt about that. And even disasters like landslides, which were once upon a time considered to be quite rare, are now becoming more frequent. Now, for instance, I was recently in a panel discussion where the discussion was that landslides should not be seen as geological disasters anymore. They are in fact hydrometeorological disasters. It's because of rainfall that you have landslides happening more frequently. So there is this whole changing pattern of disasters happening all around. And to commend the Government of India and the state governments, what we see is that over the last few decades, the mortality due to disasters have been coming down. We've been improving our early warning systems. There are better preparedness plans in place. Disaster management is kind of mainstream. It's a topic that is given a lot of importance by the political establishment. So on that front, we have done reasonably well in bringing down mortality. But what we also see is that the economic losses have been going up, and the number of disasters hitting the country has also been on the rise. So from a global perspective, there is something called the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. If anyone, if you are not familiar, it's a global agreement with which countries have come together. And some of the key goals in terms of improvement are India is committed to reducing mortality, reducing economic losses, reducing the number of people affected by disasters, reducing the critical infrastructure hit by disasters. So you have all of these indicators that are mentioned in the Sendai framework. But what you realize is that there is nothing specific in terms of individual impacts of disasters, in terms of the mental health crisis, in terms of the psychosocial care that is needed. There, these guidelines or these global frameworks are not very vocal. Now, the other point I need to note is that when we talk about disasters, right, we immediately think about, let's say, the Wayanad landslide. We could think about the cloudburst that happened in Himachal Pradesh a few months back. Last year, we had the Sikkim, the GLOF, the glacial lake outburst flood in Sikkim that devastated large areas of the region. But apart from these mega disasters, on a daily basis or at least on a weekly basis, you have a number of smaller scale instances happening in different parts of the countries. People dying due to heat strokes. One small village somewhere in the Himalayas being washed off due to a cloudburst or a landslide. Or you have traffic accidents. So you have a number of these small tragedies happening across the country where there is no national impact, there is no national focus happening on it. The newspapers don't talk about it much. So what is the kind of lived experience of the people going through these disasters? So that is also quite important to kind of ask ourselves and examine what support are they able to kind of marshal and garner. So when you look at the national guidelines, when you're hit by a disaster, usually the governments are quite swift to respond. You have assistance that comes in terms of compensation for houses lost. If you lose a life, you will have there is a fixed relief norms that are set by the government of India. And if you lose some of your, let's say your animal husbandry, like cows or poultry or a small shed, you get some assistance to kind of recover your life and livelihoods. But what is important to note is that this is extremely insufficient, and this is something that is well noted across the country, that the assistance from the government does not cover all your losses. So the kind of mental. Sorry, yeah, someone's on. Should mute yourself.
Request the participants to please keep your phones on mute.
Thanks. Thank you. So what is important to note is that where does the assistance come for these communities and individuals after the government relief norms are exhausted? So that is where I think it's very important to think about post-disaster recovery. So recovery is what we talk about after the relief phase is over, when the kind of news moves away from the media headlines, when no one talks about these disasters, when the communities are left all alone to fend for themselves. That is when we talk about long-term recovery. And I think psychosocial care right now should also be integrated into these long-term recovery plans of the government and the communities. Right now, I think a lot of focus, very important, is provided to the response phase, but we should also think about how do we look at what are the options available for the communities for long-term psychosocial recovery. That is something that we should probably deliberate and think about. Now, when it comes to UNDP's work, I think we are quite privileged to be able to have partnered with NIMHANS a few years back. With NIMHANS support, we had tried out this master trainer approach where we worked in around 6 cities of India, developed a cadre of master trainers, did a detailed assessment of the status of mental health in these city administrations, and tried to prepare a cadre of trained master trainers. But what happens is this model the challenge is that we should move away from a project-based approach towards mainstreaming this within the government of India. Because when you have projects, you have a lot of energy, you have a lot of experts coming in, capacities get built. But later, once the project lifetime gets concluded, then there is very little follow-up, and rightly so, it's not possible for us to kind of have our fingers everywhere. So that is where you need to also have this conversation about how do we build capacities, who leads this conversation at the state level? Is it the state disaster management authorities? Is it the mental health institutions? Is it the health department? So at least some clear-cut protocols in terms of responsibilities is important. And then capacities, like what capacities do you want? Because I think in the lead presentation by Professor Bhadra, he had mentioned this very clear demarcation about the role of the individual, the role of the community, the role of secondary centers and tertiary centers. So I think that kind of a very detailed capacity building exercise at the community level will be critical if you want to take this conversation forward. So I think I'll stop here. Those are some of my high-level thoughts that I felt would be worthwhile sharing here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for answering to this question and also highlighting about the key concept of there are no specific target indicators at individual level, mainly to assess climate crisis with respect to individual level indicators in terms of mental health parameters, or even at different physical health related parameters, and also even psychosocial aspects. So thank you very much for answering this question. So I would now like to move on to Dr. Vivek Benegal with the next question. Sir, with your extensive work on National Program for Climate Change and Mental Health, looking specifically at mental health with this program, how are children and adolescents being impacted with this climate change induced disasters? And additionally, could you also highlight on the initiatives taken by the NIMHANS contributing to understand and address such circumstances?
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me to be part of the panel and also, be part of this very distinguished panel. I'm going to take a slightly offbeat approach. Now, whenever people talk of climate change, the talk mostly is about acute extreme weather events. But there is this other aspect of climate change, which is creeping climate change. Now, when one talks of climate change and mental health, there is always the question as to whether climate change causes mental health problems. There's very little to show that climate change by itself is causing, other than, there have been some papers on extreme heat conditions and, certain mental health conditions. These are all associations. But apart from these direct effects that extreme weather events and natural disasters cause, there are other effects. There are indirect effects, which are because of this creeping climate change. Because rising waters means that there is enforced migration. Rising waters means that there is increased salinity in the soil, as in the Sundarbans, and that leads to displacement of populations. Displacement of populations leads to social isolation, discrimination, conflict, and these we know are causes for mental health problems. Side by side, there are intersectional effects, which, because of all these, there is social inequity, there is exclusion, and vulnerable populations with lower socioeconomic resources, people who have pre-existing mental disorders, people who have high exposure, that is in areas which have climate events, are at much higher risk. In that same way, there are some populations. Climate change affects populations in different ways, but there are some populations who are at higher risk. And for that, children, women, elderly are at higher risk. Even when you look at all this. Now, the usual way of looking at climate change and what happens to the mental health is to look at this association, that people who have been exposed to disaster have a greater risk of XYZ condition. People who have been exposed to migration have this kind of issues. I would like to just focus on a slightly different aspect, as I said, when I started. And this is related to the work, not the work that you alluded to, but the work that we are carrying on through this very large neurodevelopmental cohort study that we have, which is called the Pathways to Resilience in Mental Health. This is a cohort study of 10,000 youngsters being followed up, from the antenatal period to adulthood. And what we are learning from this study, as well as from other colleagues who are working in the area of neurodevelopment, is that, consider one proposition. How is the brain formed? The brain is formed through a combination of what is in your genome, what is predicted, or what is written in your genes, and its interaction with the exposome. That is the totality of all the environmental exposures that you face throughout your lifetime, especially important in the early years. And this gives rise to different trajectories of brain development, which in turn gives rise to different capacities, different psychological capacities, which again the individual uses to deal with his or her environmental challenges, your daily challenges as well as your larger challenges. And these are the things which give rise to vulnerability to mental illnesses. So if we take this as the first proposition, what we then understand is that this exposome, which is a variable, and in this case, the exposome is, basically climate change, climate change alters your exposome very drastically. And that leads to different variations in how your brain is created and how it is modeled, or how it progresses through adulthood into senescence and into death. So what are the things that we are looking at? We are looking at stressors which can be psychosocial stressors, which can be neurotoxins, which are there in air, water, earth, which can be infections, which increase because of climate change, like because, because of, changes that occur in the environment, changes that occur to nutrition, changes that occur in your internal microbiome. So these changes are part and parcel of climate change. So if one looks at that, then one actually gets a much larger canvas than we talk about. Climate change, in a way, is shaping the brains of children of tomorrow. Climate change is, in a creeping way, creating the conditions for a much larger mental health burden of tomorrow. And so we need to look at that. We need to plan for that. Not necessarily, of course, we are concerned about what is happening today and how it is affecting populations today. So our focus has been on that. I'll end with just two examples to illustrate what I'm talking about. And the first example is something that, just a minute. The first example is that something that Dr. Sagnik is also involved in. So basically, we have been looking at how exposure to air pollution, PM 2.5, affects brain development. And what we've been finding is, and this is a paper that is hopefully very near to being sent out, what we are finding is that exposure to PM 2.5, cumulative exposure, seems to affect children's cognition. And it does so by actually modulating or changing the development of, say, white matter in the brain. And this is very strongly modulated by socioeconomic status and by nutrition. So the poorer children are at higher risk to air pollution. The children with poorer nutrition are at higher risk to air pollution. And this results in a greater risk for developing cognitive problems and an inability to deal with the stresses and strains which lead to vulnerability later on. The other example that I wanted to really end with is something that I saw during my visit to the Sundarbans, where, as you know, because of rising waters, there is increased salinity, there is no agriculture possible. So all the young men have left and are doing shuttering work in Bangalore or Hyderabad. The women are left to deal with the old men who have no jobs, who are drinking and have no other thing to do. The young children are left because they have phones which were given to them during the pandemic, but the classes are no longer going on. Teachers do not come into the tiger territory of the Sundarbans, and so these children who have bandwidth, have cell phones, are just playing computer games, and they don't do anything else. They don't eat. They don't, and they have developed what is a first world problem. This is a problem that I see in my clinic in Bangalore. Mothers complaining of children who have developed screen addiction, and that is there. That is what you see in the tiger territory there. So there are various ways in which climate change seems to affect the various manifestations of mental illness. I'll end with that. I'm happy to carry the discussion forward.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for your insights, especially on battling about answering what happened first, whether the climate change is actually leading to mental health related manifestations, or whether the existing conditions are again predisposed with the climate crisis, and also about the importance of highlighting on the vicious cycle where poorer children with poorer nutrition are at a higher exposure for getting affected with their cognition, and also getting affected with their mental health abilities. So thank you very much for bringing those insights into the discussion. So I would like to move ahead with Dr. Sagnik for the question on, sir, with your expertise in the atmospheric sciences, as already highlighted by Dr. Vivek Benegal on the importance of air pollution, atmospheric sciences and air quality modeling at IIT Delhi, how do you envision your research on climate change and air pollution contributing to our understanding and mitigation on the impact of the mental health due to these environmental degradation, especially in urban parts of the country?
Yeah, thank you and good evening, everyone. So I am basically a climate scientist who works in this interdisciplinary space for climate and health. So last year, there was an exercise, international effort to map the knowledge gap in this space, like to understand, how much we know in terms of climate change impacts on overall health, both physical and mental. And what emerged is that climate change impact on mental health by far is least understood, not just in lower or middle income countries, but also in the developed countries. And it was also pointed out and came out in the discussion that one of the reasons why, it's least understood, one aspect is obviously the lack of adequate data and perhaps less attention on mental health compared to the general physical health or non-communicable diseases. Because I work in the space of exposure, we always feel that, if we can provide better exposure data perhaps and reach out to the health professionals like Dr. Menegal and others, we can try bridging this gap. Now, coming to your specific question, that whatever research so far my group has done, or in general from the literature, I can tell that what we started understanding is association between some of the environmental exposure and mostly physical health outcomes. Very few studies actually have looked into the mental health outcomes, which is also pointed out by the previous panelists and speakers. We need to really understand how this current risk, which is based on the current exposure and conditions, will change in the global warming era. How to do that? Obviously, we need to really look ahead and project how the environmental exposure, for example, heat, air pollution, extreme events, they are going to change in future. And when I say in future, obviously, the focus here is mostly near future. At least we have the climate models which provide those informations. Also, at the same time, there are socio-economic scenarios developed, which is very, very important in this context, because when you talk about future, it's not just this environmental exposure that's going to change. The demographic condition is also going to change in response to the adaptation and mitigation strategies taken by the communities. And again, it was raised like issues like displacement, for example. So some of these shared socioeconomic pathway scenarios, or we call them SSP scenarios, have given some idea about the expected changes in the demography, which is very important to consider when we talk about quantifying the risk and vulnerability in future. Second important point is that, again, the current studies mostly look in an isolated way. For example, there are studies which are looking the association or the effect of air pollution. There are studies which has linked some of the mental health issues with, for example, temperature. But the synergistic effect is completely missing. We really do not know what happens when people are, for example, exposed to high level of air pollution, simultaneously to high heat, and also, some of the other climate related extremes. We need to really understand. There is one another interesting pathway that was not mentioned but briefly mentioned, Dr. Menegal talked about cognitive development. There is now a lot of effort from the World Bank to understand, and I'm doing some work for them, to understand the impact of climate change on the learning outcomes or education performance. And again, I think one pathway that I figured out by reading the literature is obviously this impaired cognitive development. But the other thing is that, whenever climate disasters strike, and also due to these environmental extremes like heat and air pollutions, there are disruptions in the, the normal school or social structure, and students' learning get affected. And if the learning gets affected, obviously there is a high chance that the students, when they grow, they will be at a disadvantaged positions. And again, this is a very emerging area. Most recently, there is a very good review article published, which can be shared to the audience on this, but very clearly mentioned that very few studies are actually there. The last point I want to mention is that we also need to understand the pathways, the connecting the physical health outcomes with the mental health outcomes. A lot of the studies are already available where clearly air pollution, heat, and other extreme events are linked to some of the major outcomes of the, you take non-communicable diseases, you take the vulnerable population like pregnancy outcomes, birth outcomes, and then, the child development and all. But how that really translates to the mental health is a question, and we need to really understand. So obviously, what I'm trying to say is that this is really a very, very important topic, and thank you for raising this issue. We need collaborative effort and systematic strategy to address these issues, fill the knowledge gap, and then only we can guide policies. Because as of now, there is very little really to talk about in the Indian context. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Being from the pure science field, you have actually shared a lot of insights with respect to the synergistic effects, the missing synergistic effects about the heat, then also about the air pollution and various parameters on the climate change and its effects on health. And also thank you very much for highlighting the UN's work on learning outcomes and the impaired cognitive ability. That is actually very much it is like a very stressing issue. And actually it is like very important for us to actually look into that, because even Dr. Vivek also mentioned about the larger cohort study where they are actually looking at the cognitive part, and even with the UN work where we are seeing with the impaired cognitive ability. And also thanks for sharing the review article on the importance of this climate change with respect to various indicators with air pollution and also other aspects. So thank you very much. And I would like to move on to our panelist, Dr. Parmesh sir. Sir, from your perspective, welcome, sir. So from your perspective as a physician scientist, especially interested in the area of, again, air pollution, and also working as a scientist at IISc Bangalore, how is this climate change impacting the mental health of children? And can you also elaborate on the efforts undertaken by IISc in this area? Over to you. Can you please unmute, sir?
Oh, sorry. Well, age-related issue. Okay. Thank you, Lata. At the outset, I extend my sincere thanks for the organizer for giving an opportunity to share with the excellent faculty members, and I'm thankful for that. I, being a pediatric pulmonologist, we are connected with the lungs and the brain and axis, gut and brain axis, gut, lung, and brain axis, all these things. Most of them cover. Air pollution, in fact, has got an impact from womb to tomb. There are enough substantiating data in that context. Coming to that one, air pollution, global warming, and climate change are closely interrelated, leading to rise in the temperature, rise in sea level, and hydraulic extremes. These psychological impacts are as grave as the physical effect. Maybe acute one, acute, chronic one, chronic, it continues that one. We have to manage it. Recent study showed that the communities that bear the disproportionate burden from physical health problems associated with air pollution also suffer greater mental health. Coming to that one, 70% of the non-communicable diseases are becoming more and more, 70% non-communicable diseases are the airway allergies, including asthma. Asthma is a chronic respiratory disease, environmental disease with significant socio-economic burden. Our own data shows asthma was 9% in Bangalore in 1979. Every 5 years we have been doing it, going up. So it has gone up to 29.5% to 1999 in 2 decades in Bangalore. That was correlated with the change in demography of the city of Bangalore. To further, we saw in 2004 and 2009, there is decrease in the incidence. Now it has got about from 29 come to 25% as of in 2009. We all expert met in WHO. We discussed it might be due to saturation of the existing population. In future, you may not see the climbing up a ladder like that. It may be small peaks here and there. However, the persistent asthma and persistent severe asthma, which need constant medication, need a lot of visit for the emergency room, and mortality is very high. That you have to focus on that one. I think sure enough, we have been seeing it as a matter of fact. The continued exposure in the same population shows the persistent asthma increased 25.5% in 1999 to 72.5% in 2009. Persistent severe asthma, where they are not controlled with the constant controller medication, repeated visit to emergency room and mortality extremely high in them. There's gone up from 6.5% and to 11% during the same 10-year period. So what we thought, we were taken about these persistent asthmatic group of children with a pediatric psychiatrist together. We analyzed those children, what they have it. Though 97% of these children are argumentative, 68% are attention seekers, 50% have irritability, 50% have temper tantrum, 42% are labile mode, 33% destructiveness, 33% fearfulness, 33% dependency, 25% nervousness, 3% are suicidal tendency. These are all the things chronic persistent asthma have got this. Almost 100% of them have a problem. We have to tackle that issue, not only physical issue. These are all articles have been published. Further, adolescent, we tackled it, taking this small group of adolescent, we analyzed them. They say, I never thought asthma is a chronic disease where I have to take constant medication. These are all the issues. I am not too sure when I'm going to get this attack, when I'm taking the medication. I had to take the medicine daily, more so in the emergency department in front of my friends. And the girls have got a different issue. They said, because of the social stigma attached to the asthma, many of the girls said, I may not be able to get married if people come to know if you use the inhaler, and my mother-in-law might give trouble. These are all the issues we have to tackle. Psychological issues are all there. Further, we evaluated the chronic cough. Chronic cough in Bangalore increased significantly from 8% to 21.25%. There is 5% increase in a chronic cough every year in Bangalore. That is predominantly come from the upper respiratory tract because 10 micron is predominantly high. If you look at the Bangalore pollution data, every 10 micron is the biggest. 2.5 is the most dangerous. There's no question about it. Less than 2.5 across the blood-brain barrier, it goes up all over the body, produces various organs, damaging it. And then what had happened? The chronic cough has got 0.5, the psychogenic cough, what we call somatic cough. From 2018, we don't call psychogenic cough, we call somatic cough. It was in 1919 and 1.05% in our study. Now it has gone up 2.8% in 2017. It's not only the cause, it is also a result. And also, food allergy in these people have got 15% food allergy. Some percent have got anaphylactic reaction. The food allergy people, they're scared to death when he's going to anaphylactic reaction, because 2 to 5% globally, and United States, 120,000 people visit emergency room, 200 people will die because not able to get epinephrine on time. So this is major concern. Many of, I have got 5 families, mother don't sleep, child don't sleep. They don't want to take them to a restaurant. This is the biggest problem we have been facing in the chronic diseases. But climate change from air pollution has an impact on the central nervous system earlier. We have now, as a pulmonologist, we have been going through this one. And this brain center is there, Indian Institute of Science. And we have autism, dementia, Alzheimer's, cognitive performance, anosmia, neurodegenerative disease. In addition to that, behavior problem on polluted days has shown, they have enough data to substantiate this internationally. Increased crime rate when the pollution is very high, impaired judgment, worst test scores on the polluted days, reduced productivity of work, depression, and increase in the anxiety. Coming to the Indian Institute of Science, Deviation and Climate Change, what it has been doing. We work on atmospheric, oceanic science, water pollution, land pollution, Himalayan glacier melting, air pollution, impact on health. We propagate the knowledge to the students, society, stakeholders, and policymakers. Most of our work is bringing a legislation and banning leaded petrol. It has already been done. Our work using the face mask for traffic police officer, first time in the world. We did it. Police personnel banning the tobacco smoke and in the public places, restricting the bursting of the firecrackers during Diwali festival, and reducing the weight in the school bags to protect the spinal health of the children, and reducing the noise pollution, and appointment Burelal committee to clean up the megacities and school atmosphere. From our work only, it has been done from our work. In addition to that, EpiPen is available here. I am one of the anaphylactic reaction, near fatal anaphylactic reaction. This cost about $450 to $2,000 in different countries. In India, it is not made. We worked for 5 years. We just got the patenting last month only. I think we can make it in $5 in India, and is reusable. Unlike these are all the throwable, we are reusable for 50 cents. We can able to do, we are waiting for the marketing. This is what we have done in our institute. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for your comprehensive insights, especially also highlighting the work at Devacha Center, IISc, and also highlighting over last two decades, how much there is an increase in all the parameters, almost all the parameters, and also with respect to the respiratory conditions and persistent asthma, and also highlighting the importance of psychological issues among adolescents, especially among girls. It is definitely very, very important. And even we have faced actually some of our students actually when, especially during COVID, they were actually requiring frequent visits to the emergencies for inhalers and also for nebulization. And also the frequent visits made some of our students actually quit the course. So the extent of psychological impact and issues is definitely very huge, and we agree with, and also thank you very much for sharing all the results of majority of your studies. So thank you very much, and I would like to hand over to Prachit to take over the next session, next round of questions with the panelists.
Thank you, Dr. Lata, and yeah, so we'll have some quick inputs from our esteemed panelists. So this is one last question that I would like to pose to all our panelists. So we'll start with Mr. Manish Mohan Das, sir. Sir, if you could please turn on your video. So in light of the recent climate events, what strategies are emerging in your respective fields to enhance support as well as resilience for the affected communities in our nation? And also how these strategies can be effectively implemented, and what role can stakeholders, including members of the audience, our participants who are, budding professionals, can play in advancing these efforts?
Yeah, thank you, Prashant, for this question. I just limit my response to one point that I want to make. That for disaster management or any program intervention, you need finances. You need financial support and allocation from the government. It's only then that you can talk about strategies and interventions. So under the 15th Finance Commission, there has been a substantial allocation for disaster management. So in fact, every state has a well-fixed, determined amount of resources for disaster management. And this resources has also been split into 4 funding windows. 40% goes for response, 20% goes for disaster mitigation, 10% for preparedness, and 30% for long-term recovery. Right. Now, what happens is that the state disaster management authorities or the state governments must come up with technical proposals that address these issues in a very cogent way, and then they can get money allocated for their proposals from these funding windows. So when we're talking about psychosocial care for disaster management, my submission, and in fact, when in our engagement with different state disaster management authorities, what we tell them is that there is financing available. What is missing are high quality proposals. So we need to kind of come up with strategies where you have different departments involved. We need to identify who will be leading this particular intervention. What are the kind of outputs, outcomes, timelines? So how do we convert this into a project document, which can then get financed by the state governments, and then you implement action on the ground? So I think that is one possible intervention that we could think about, at least as a low-hanging fruit to kind of think about. So I'll limit it here. Maybe we can go to the other participants.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you for highlighting the significance of quality proposals as well as multi-sectorial collaboration. Well taken, sir. So I'd like to ask the same question to Dr. Vivek Panicker, sir. So in light of the recent climate event, what strategies are emerging in your respective area for support of the affected communities, and how can we ensure that these strategies are effectively implemented? Your views, please.
So this is actually a fairly difficult question to answer, because like we alluded to earlier, the fact that the connections between climate change and mental health are not clear by themselves. So while mitigation strategies, prevention strategies have been in force, especially in relationship to disasters and disaster management. The problem is what we do with creeping climate change, because that is something that is happening. It is invariable, and it's going to happen. Even with all the mitigation that we do, there is still going to be this thing which is going to happen. Now, there is one thing. I mean, since I talked about this entire thing about how changes in the exposome are driving future brain change, let me stick only to that. And there is one common variable which seems to be driving all these things, whether it is changes occurring in utero, changes occurring in childhood, or in adults and in older people. This seems to be the phenomenon of inflammation. Oxidative stress, whether it is because of psychosocial stress, whether it is because of nutritional problems, children eating highly processed foods, because of the stress of migration, etc., seems to work through the common mechanism of inflammation, especially chronic inflammation. And chronic inflammation is reflected in the brain in terms of activation of certain inflammatory cells in the brain. And so one of the strategies which is very promising is to look at anti-inflammatory strategies. Anti-inflammatory strategies can be the use of nutritional supplements, micronutrients during pregnancy and birth. They can be teaching children and mothers how to reduce stress by things like, say, yoga or mindfulness. They can be various other things which can be used. I mean, you've heard of the blue zone strategies, which are used in certain blue zones of the earth. Similar things, would be universal strategies which could be used. And then as we go along, we'll have to look at strategies which we use in populations which are at high risk, etc. But I don't think that we have a lot of answers yet. Let me end there.
Yeah, agreed, sir. So we still do not have conclusive evidence, and your points are very well taken, especially on health promotion related strategies that may be implemented. What you spoke about anti-inflammatory strategies, good nutrition, as well as other health promotion measures like yoga, physical activity, and certain specific high-risk strategies which may be thought of. So now moving on, let's move to Dr. Sagnik Dey. Your quick inputs on this question, please, sir.
Yeah, so I want to mention three very quick points, not very specific to mental health, but in general, climate and health. There are initiatives, for example, NCDC has a program focusing on climate change and health, and they have started a disease surveillance program and all. There are also efforts from various ministries, be it from the environmental side or health side. However, most of these efforts are kind of disjointed. For example, we have a national clean air program, which hardly, talks to the, within the same Ministry of Environment, talk to the climate arm. So we need to really, have this more interdisciplinary and also interministerial dialogue to strengthen the implementation plan. The last point I want to mention that there are efforts to mitigate climate change, which is obviously a global topic. There are a lot of debates politically. We are committing to net zero. We all know that completely mitigating climate change will take a long time. In the meanwhile, what is very important is to devise appropriate adaptation strategies. Because in the near future, I think the adaptation is going to play a very important role, be it mental health, impact on mental health or even physical health. So I think we need to really strengthen research also on the adaptation side and demonstrate that some of the adaptation strategies that perhaps is in theory, if implemented properly, is giving us actual benefit. I think that will then further, I would say, enhance the confidence in the policy makers to expedite things. The other thing which recently started is that there are some short-term forecasts being given, for example, like for air pollution or heat by Ministry of Earth Science. Our India Meteorological Department issues this forecast. However, it is realized that these forecasts have very little meaning when it comes to actually, application or usage, because there is no proper connection to health is mentioned. What will happen if you say tomorrow there will be heat wave? Some people have to go out for their, work and all. So now there is a conscious effort from the government side in collaboration with scientists to see how we can change that kind of just the meteorology or weather forecasting into more health-based warning system. And I think, again, some scope is there to really, do research and actually make that happen. So I will stop here.
Thank you, sir, for your very valuable insights. And yes, multidisciplinary and appropriate implementation strategies are the need of the hour. And of course, the forecasting that is existing needs to be strengthened and needs to be made more relevant and applicable. So now let us move on to the next panelist, Paramesh sir. If you could please give your quick input, sir, on the question that I asked.
Okay. Thank you, Prajit. I think the disaster being predicted earlier. 2011, a professor in Institute of Science mentioned about it. Western Ghat is a sensitive area. There are 6 states contributing that. Our highest land is in Karnataka, over 30,000 square kilometers. Kerala has got maybe 6,000 or 9,000 square kilometers. Gujarat is the least, 250 square meters. All the states have refused. It's a sensitive area. No mining should be happen. No polluting industries and heavy residential area should not be built in that area. 2013, again, they appointed another guy, same from Indian Institute of Science, Kasturi Rangan. And he mentioned about 37% not to do anything. Rest of the thing, no sanding, anything, small agriculture land, those things can be allowed. But they never listen, politicians. Now they're realizing, 6th time they're approaching, now they're realizing they want to implement, better listen to the scientists best possible way. That I want to propagate it. And I like to end with this one. Let us move with this, what we learned from this one, positive thinking. Let's protect the Mother Earth, pursue the research and sustenance of lives, and think locally, act locally, propagate locally, globally. And let us propagate our national ethos, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, one earth, one family, one future. And also, we are trying to propagate, going to all the schools are propagating everything, that each one of us have to reduce 2 tons of carbon footprint per year per person. That's what we have been doing we're propagating for all these things. In the future generation, they will contribute. This is what we have been doing. So thank you very much for your patient hearing.
Thank you very much, sir, for the thought-provoking point.
Thank you.
So over to you, Dr. Lata, for the concluding statement of this panel discussion.
So thank you, one and all. And also, I would like to thank all the participants for joining in large numbers. And can I request few questions? If we can take 1 or 2 questions, sir, if there is a possibility. Okay, there is one question by Debarati. What policy interventions can be implemented to address climate crisis, mitigate its health effects, and promote psychological resilience? I think on the second part, promote psychological resilience, particularly among vulnerable populations. So can I invite Vivek sir to answer this?
I think as far as the policy is concerned, I am not the right person to talk about it.
Sure, sir.
Lataji, if I can just comment here.
Yes, sir. Please go
Dr.
ahead.
Shagnik actually mentioned quite succinctly some of the policy initiatives earlier.
Yeah, very quickly, if I may say that there are policies regarding climate change adaptation and mitigations, but there is no specific policy as of my knowledge really to talk about health resilience, building health resilience, in terms of the climate change. I think that's what actually I mentioned, that we need really more interministerial dialogue and interdisciplinary approach or inclusive, some of these policies need to be more inclusive in a sense that right now what is happening is that in the environment or climate field versus health field, things are quite disjointed.
Yeah, Manish sir, if you could please give us. Thank you, Shagnik sir. Manish sir, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, no, I think just echoing what Professor Day had mentioned, that there are a lot of national policies that specifically address climate change. We have the national policy on climate change. We have state action plans on climate change. So every state has an action plan on climate change, which is quite multidisciplinary. It takes in information from a lot of departments. So there's a lot of literature around. Government is also committed to certain international goals in terms of reducing its emission intensity, in terms of becoming net zero by 2070. So we have all of these commitments globally and also nationally that government has committed itself to. So I think what is more important is to make sure that how do we strike a delicate balance between our economic needs in terms of growth vis-a-vis managing the climate crisis. I think that's going to be the key challenge.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you for highlighting. And especially the implementation part definitely is a challenge, considering the various diversities existing in our country. So I would like to thank each and every one of you for participating in this panel. And I would like to hand over to, since there are no more questions on the chat, I would like to hand over to Raisa for the concluding session. Thank you, one and all.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Latha. So we now have the vote of thanks. So we've had a very fruitful mental health dialogue 5. And at the outset, I would like to thank all our esteemed resource persons, starting from Dr. Shubhashish Batra, Dr. Jai Kumar, and our distinguished panelists, Mr. Manish Mohan, Dr. Vivek Benagal, Dr. Sadnik Day, and Dr. Paramesh for sharing your views, your expertise, and we are truly grateful to you all. We would also like to thank all those who have helped us in organizing this mental health dialogue 5. So we have our very dynamic NMHS2 team, Dr. Shubhi, who did all the background work, who did all the running around and worked very hard behind the scenes, and Dr. Raiza Zainab and Dr. Reshma Harikumar, who are our anchors and who ensured that things go on very smoothly. So thank you all. And of course, the entire team who worked behind the scenes for this particular event. I'd like to thank Dr. Latha for her support, for her inputs, and for moderating the panel discussion. And we thank you all. Thank the members of the audience for being very patient, for being very proactive listeners, for being a very active audience. Thank you all. We'll meet again a couple of months later for Mental Health Dialogue 6. Thank you all. Have a good day. Namaste.
Thank you, Dr. Prachit.
Thank you, each one of you. Namaste for all of you. Wonderful.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Safe.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.